turn anything off.
Right. Yeah, okay. Good morning, all. As you probably just heard, we're live streaming today, and the button's been pressed go. So if everyone can use their microphones when speaking in today's meeting. Firstly, I'd just like to welcome Rebecca from Torvine Council, who's an officer within the scrutiny function. You're obviously very welcome to the meeting today, and hopefully you might be able to reciprocate the visit in the near future. We'll move straight on to agenda item 1, which is apologies for absence, and we don't appear to have any apologies. So we'll move into item 2, which is declarations of interest. Okay. Item 3, which is to confirm for accuracy the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 23rd of September. The copies attached. If we just take the report as a whole, are there any concerns or issues you wish to raise regarding the minutes?
I couldn't spot anything wrong, Chair. I move we accept them.
Second that, Chair.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. Public forum, are there any items? Nope, nothing. Okay. Great. Well, we'll move straight on then to the first substantive item, which is the Monmouthshire Local Development Plan Community Infrastructure Levy. I'd very much like to welcome Martin and George today, who are going to present the report that they provided to us. I don't know if you've got an actual PowerPoint presentation, or you're just going to present verbally?
No, present verbally.
Yeah, okay. So over to you. Thank you very much.
Yes, a Community Infrastructure Levy, CIL for short, is a new levy that local authorities in England and Wales can choose to charge on new developments in their area. And that money can be used to support development by funding infrastructure that the local community needs. It applies to most new buildings. Changes are based on the size and type of new development. The regulations actually came into force on 6th of April 2010, and it's a UK government initiative because taxing is not a devolved function. The liability to pay CIL for development will not arise until the local authorities actually implement a charging schedule, which has to be based on an up-to-date development plan, which in this case is the LDP. It was resolved at a full meeting of Council on 27th of June 2013 last year to commence preparatory work for CIL with a view to adopting CIL as soon as possible following adoption of the Monmouthshire LDP. It was partly a process we had to go through to satisfy the LDP examination because there was concern that there might have been a policy gap between the adoption of the plan and the implementation of CIL. But at the same time, it was important to get a steer to actually go ahead and start work on preparing it. The LDP itself then, as you will know, was adopted on the 27th of February 2014. So the first stage is to prepare a preliminary draft charging schedule. And the intention is to report that to Council in November 2014. The charging schedule itself has to undergo 2 rounds of public consultation. Following the first consultation, it goes from being a preliminary draft to a draft, and then that is consulted on again, and any objections that are raised to that are heard at a public examination. So at the moment, if Council agrees to us going forward as per the timetable, we're envisaging perhaps CIL could be adopted by about July 2015, although some aspects of that are out of our control because it depends on, for instance, the inspectorate and appointing a planning inspector. So the information that you've been given, there are 3 appendices, and these are what will be made available to the public and to developers as part of the consultation. Appendix A is a draft set of guideline notes which just explains the process, generally in a generic sort of form. Appendix B is a draft of the draft preliminary charging schedule, and Appendix C is a CIL viability assessment. That was the final document prepared for the Council by consultants. That they've made certain recommendations, and it's for the Council to decide whether or not to take those recommendations on board. So briefly, some of the main points of CIL, the types of development that are chargeable. It's all new build residential development, new non-residential buildings with a gross internal floor space of over 100 square metres, and new build extensions to existing buildings, again over 100 square metres. There are certain exemptions from paying CIL. Some of the most important are the development with less than internal floor area of less than 100 square metres, unless it's a dwelling. Self-built dwellings and residential annexes and extensions are exempt from paying SIL, and the regulations contain a specific definition of what constitutes self-build, and also affordable housing is exempt from SIL, and development for charitable purposes is exempt from SIL. Landowners become liable for SIL when planning permission is granted, and it is payable, not necessarily by the landowner, because the liability can be transferred when a development commences, although it is possible for payments to be made on an instalment basis, and we are envisaging that the council would adopt an instalment policy, and also it can be payable in terms of phases, if you have a big development that's developed in phases. So planning permissions granted before SIL becomes operational is not liable to the charge, but will still be subject to Section 106 requirements. The overall potential funding stream is slightly less than the Section 106 is, because SIL brings all residential development down to a single dwelling, which you don't normally get contributions from at the moment, into the charging regime. It's also important in terms of considering whether to adopt SIL that after the 1st of April 2015, no more than 5 Section 106 agreements can be used to fund a single piece of infrastructure. So if you had, for instance, you wanted to contribute to a school, once five Section 106s are contribute to those school improvements, you couldn't have Section 106 for any further developments to contribute to that piece of infrastructure. It's something which the government have introduced to try and encourage councils down the SIL route. A further point, which is quite important, is that 15% of funding raised through SIL has to be spent on infrastructure priorities that should be agreed with the local community in the town and community council area where development is taking place. There are 2 elements to the production of SIL, which is a charging schedule, production of a SIL's charging schedule, which is a viability assessment and an infrastructure assessment. The viability assessment is used to set the SIL rates. The study that I've referred to in Appendix C has been undertaken by consultants to establish the levels of SIL that are feasible. It is very important that you don't set the SIL charge at such a high rate that affects scheme viability and prevents development coming forward in an area. So in Monmouthshire, we're envisaging that SIL would mainly be applied to residential development. As looking at non-residential schemes, it's only out-of-town retail schemes that have come forward as form of development and which is feasible to charge without affecting viability. So the charges that we are proposing, based on the recommendations of the consultants, are set out in on page 2 of Appendix B, which is the preliminary draft charging schedule. And that envisages a charge of £60 per square metre for strategic LDP sites, and non-strategic sites then in the main towns of Monmouthshire and basically the rest of Monmouthshire except for Sevenside, charge at £110 per square metre. The difference is that strategic LDP sites have got a lot of infrastructure costs up front to bring them forward, so the viability is not so good as just a non-standard site which is much easier to develop. The sites in Sevenside are proposed to be charged at £60 per square metre. The reason for that has been that land values are much lower in the Sevenside area than in the other parts of the county. One exception to the charge on strategic sites is Sudbury Paper Mill, because the viability assessment for that has shown that if Sudbury Paper Mill provides affordable housing in accordance to the policy, then SIL is actually not feasible. It's not viable. There's also proposed to have a charge of nil per square metre on our sites in main and minor villages, where the policy is that there's a high level of affordable housing. For instance, in the main villages, they have to provide 60% affordable housing. Well, that just means that charging the SIL rate is not feasible, because the main priority there is to bring forward those high levels of affordable housing. And so that study is going to be part of the consultation process, because it is important for developers to see how the viability assessments have been carried out, what sort of assumptions have been made in relation to these sites, and that gives them the opportunity to comment in case the consultants in case they feel the consultants have got it wrong. Though, as I said, ultimately that will go to an examination. So in terms of what SIL can be spent on, it is related to an infrastructure that's necessary to implement the development plan, but infrastructure in very general terms. So we did prepare a draft infrastructure plan that went to council at the same meeting last June in 2013. That was very much a draft form, which set out some various placemaking schemes that perhaps SIL could go towards, but that has to be refined as we go forward through the process. SIL will replace a substantial element of funding that's currently received from Section 106 agreements. Well, Section 106 funding will still be required for infrastructure necessary to ensure development comes forward, like a major access improvement, road improvement, some on-site remedies of problems, or providing facilities like play facilities. Affordable housing itself will come forward through Section 106. One advantage of SIL is that, unlike Section 106, it does not have to be spent directly on matters necessary to implement a specific planning permission. It can be used on a more strategic basis to provide infrastructure in a wider area, which would be set out in the council's infrastructure plan. It also doesn't necessarily have to be spent in the town where the development takes place, although probably that wouldn't go down too well, and we can't envisage in a situation where perhaps the expenditure could be distributed about the county in relation to the amount of development that's been taken. But theoretically, it could go to anywhere within the county. The items that the council intends to spend SIL on needs to be specified in what's called the Regulation 1 to 3 list. This is on page 17 of Appendix 2 of the preliminary draft charging schedule. So at the moment, we've drafted this in very general terms, suggesting physical infrastructure like sustainable transport improvements, possibly a upgrade of broadband connectivity, town centre improvements, social infrastructure, which include education, strategic sports and recreation facilities, and strategic green infrastructure. So this list, as I said, it is very general at the moment. Ideally, it would be broken down into more specific schemes. It can be varied over time, although subject to consultation, and it can be reviewed according to council's priorities and resources. And that is a decision really for the council to take, well, as we as planners have suggested some areas, that is a decision which would be a corporate decision, and would need to be set out by the council in its infrastructure plan as it's developed. And that's basically all I wanted to say. And any questions?
Okay. Thank you very much. That's very helpful, and it's clearly a very detailed document, which I hope will take a sort of wider overview on it now today. I just think, the initial thoughts is that it's going to provide more predictability potentially for developers and for us as people who are going to be planning for the future. And enables that greater degree of certainty. But obviously very much interested to hear members' thoughts and comments on what you've received today. So Councillor Prosser, would you like to kick off?
Yes, okay. Well, at the moment, we've got 106 agreements, and this is like a new tax in a way, isn't it? I've read all the documents. It's quite heavy reading, I'll be honest with you, and I understand all that you've just said, but I think it's worth explaining to the general public, if you like, the difference between 106 and SIL, because the 106 provides a certain amount. You did mention it in your speech, I do appreciate that, but the 106 is for community benefit, and I've been on the panels in the local communities that decide who's going to get what, if you like, when certain amounts have been put together. And so I'd like to see the difference between the 106 and the SIL, and if, let's say, you've got a pot of money from a SIL, I think the arguments, if you like, in inverted commas, that we'll pursue will be who's going to get what and where, and whose decision is that. Now, at the moment with 106s, we have a strategic panel which we set up, specifically because of complications of who's getting what, where and when. And so with the SIL monies that would come in, how would that be affected? Would that be a total council decision? Would it be a local panel decision? How would you envisage that operating? That's my first question.
Well, I anticipate that the schemes that we wanted to spend SIL on would come forward through the infrastructure plan, which would be a corporate document. That's just my personal view. The procedures need to be established. There is, as I mentioned, there is 15% of SIL goes to the local community or town council. So they would have that money to spend as they see fit, although ideally with the council's assistance and a joint agreement between the two. So,
could I just ask something there? So it's the town or community council where that development takes place in. So if it took part in a small community council, it would go to that community council, would it? Is that what he's saying?
15% of the SIL money that's raised from a development in that council area. The rest goes into a pot, which is a strategic pot for the council to decide to spend as it sees fit. It's not for me to say whether the current arrangements will continue as far as how the bidding process is undertaken. But there is, the SIL regulations have introduced something which was on an informal basis previously in just in a circular, but is now embedded in the regulations. The Section 106 money can only be used to make the development acceptable in planning terms, directly related to the development, and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. So Section 106 legally is only meant to assist the development of that site. But SIL money can be spent on a much more wider basis. If you could have a site on one side of a town, but there's a major council project on the other side of the town, which is important to the way the town develops as a sustainable community and as a viable community. So that SIL money could then go into that scheme on the other side of town, which isn't particularly necessary to carry out the scheme.
Well, my question on that one was, if that was the case, it was another project on the other side of town, who would decide what monies, how that would be distributed? Would it be a full council meeting, or would it be a local panel of some kind yet to be defined?
I don't think that's for me to say. That is a council decision, really.
If I can come in here to help, that as Martin has said, that Section 106 money is directly related to the site. SIL money is, as I think you described it, Councillor, like a roof tax. So the important thing there is that there is clarity as to how priorities are going to be arrived at, and I think that the spending plan should cover that as much as possible. So I think I would hope that the council decision on the final document would prioritise the spending, so that if it was to be spent on park and ride, for example, in Roggett as a council-wide project, or on broadband, then that would be put down as a priority. And then maybe there'd be a schedule actually saying what proportion of the money would be spent on which topic. So again, a member decision in the charging schedule could well arrive at a decision where you say that of all the money that is taken in through SIL, then a certain proportion will automatically go to education or to park and ride facilities or to broadband, and then another proportion will be spent more locally, perhaps, in the area. So I would hope that, as Martin said, that certainly the decision will be taken by members with the advice of senior officers as to how the charging schedule is arrived at, and the infrastructure plan and the spending schedule. And hopefully that clarity will be derived from that document, so it won't just be a free-for-all on each amount of money that's derived. Yeah. Well, exactly. I think that would be a problem, and I think that would bring the system into disrepute, and there'd be an awful lot of debating. So, as I say, hopefully the eventual infrastructure plan will be clear enough so that priorities are set, so that the public and members and developers and so on have a good idea of what proportion of money is going to be spent on county-wide projects and what proportion is going to be spent more locally.
Okay, well, thank you for those answers. I mean, what I'm trying to get round to is at the end of the day, when money's come in, everybody wants some, basically, and we have to have the procedures in place that defines how that happens. And I know you say you'll have priorities, and the priorities might be A, broadband, B, parks, or whatever, but when the money's come in, are we people in the broadband going to fight against the people in the parks? You know, I mean, somebody has to define, somebody's got to be the arbiter at the end of the day of who gets what, and that's what I think needs defining.
Thank you, Councillor Prosser. Councillor Hayward, I know there's town and community councils, there's an issue you wanted to look at.
Yes, but some of the points that have been brought up so far concern me too, because the process there I was a bit worried about. As George explained there, this is the start of a process, and the SIL is likely to be several meetings involving several council decisions before we go forward. And we all know that the way it works, like the LDP process, even though it ended up with something that councillors weren't exactly happy with, councillors were told that you voted for this all the way through. And we're not, because the initial votes might have the broad outlines in there, we're then bound by those when it comes to later votes. So I'm just a bit concerned that, say, the table 123, which has got broadband infrastructure, which is a very vague title, if that goes through to council, in future we'll be told, no, back in October 2014, you agreed that the money would be spent on broadband infrastructure, and officers are telling you that this is what we want to spend it on, but it's your decision because you agreed in October 2014, and I'm concerned that councillors might not be aware of the decisions they're taking on a paper that's 100 and something pages long is going to bind them in the future. So I just want to bring that point up here, because there's a lot of broad detail in here which looks very good and can be superficially passed over, but it could affect decisions that the council take in the future, where we're told you've already taken a decision, and it just concerns me that the process will be a series of votes in council, each one adding a bit more on, but you're bound by the previous decisions. But the main point, you're quite right, Chair, that I wanted to bring up was concerning this 15% community, and Martin explained that 15% will be decided by community councils, but that's not what the paper says. The paper quite clearly says that 15% of CIL receipts to spend on infrastructure projects should be agreed with local communities, with no definition or resolution of how that agreement is. Now, if a local community is told, yes, here is the sum of money, which might be considerable because our LDP policy is strategic sites, so there might be a good big chunk of SIL money from strategic sites, and they're told you can either spend it on a new road or internet connections. But those are the choices you're given. Now, that could be implied that that's agreed with the local community, but the local community might in fact have no input into that decision whatsoever. So can you just clarify which is correct? Because Martin in his presentation said quite clearly that 15% will be given to the local community councils to decide how to spend it, but the paper says otherwise.
Yes, the regulations and the regulations of UK government, but the Welsh government has given some advice on it. There was a minister's letter, and it does use the term agreed. You know, I agree with you that that's open to interpretation, and I think it's for the final procedures to be decided upon. But I would have thought that the council would not try to restrain town and community councils in that. That would be my personal view, and that it has to be done with their agreement. So then the decision on what infrastructure is, as I said, agreed between the two. So I don't think that would be subject to a restraining order on the council as to what it can be spent on. I would imagine the council would be in a position to give professional advice to community councils who haven't got that facility themselves. But ultimately, I would say, to be agreed, and both sides have to be signed up to the process. But that is the phrase that's used in the guidance, is agreed.
Councillor Hayward, can I just ask Kelly to come? She just indicated that she wants to relate to that point now.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just say a few words, I think it's really important to understand the wider context relating to community infrastructure levy. And I think one of the issues that we have at the moment with Section 106 funding, it's a really effective tool, and obviously it gives a great boost to local towns and communities. But very often I'm not convinced we're really using that strategically and in accordance with identified and evidenced local needs and priorities. And there's been a few cases recently where I thought, well, perhaps we could make better use of that money if we were looking about future needs, if we were thinking about the long term, if we were thinking about what some of our communities really tell us matters. So if you think about the context of Whole Place and the two plans that we have one for Brunnicombe, we have one now in Caldecott for the whole of Sevenside. We've started to pull together the structures through programme boards, through town teams that are telling us what local need and priority looks like. So we have to ensure that we engage beyond town and community councils to the other groups that are in existence, the other stakeholders that are helping us gather this evidence so that we can be sure in future this SIL is used in the most optimal way possible. And town and community councils will have a very key role to play in that, of course. But I think now we're starting to establish some other frameworks which mean that we can deliver projects, schemes, we can start thinking about how capital can offset some of the revenue burdens that we face. And I think we've got all of the means now starting to come together for us to be really creative and imaginative in the way in which we use SIL in the future.
Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I'm afraid that doesn't give me much comfort. I heard words there strategically, which generally means county-wide. I-County, which is led by Monmouthshire County Council. So that seemed to minimise the amount of involvement that town and community councils are going to have. Fair enough, it might mean that MCC have regional meetings or area meetings, or what overtook, say, the partnership forums, etc., etc. But we know that there isn't any real involvement there. It isn't an engagement thing. Those meetings are generally led by MCC, and the officer quite clearly said that it's important that the money is spent on strategic initiatives rather than necessarily local initiatives. So I'm a bit concerned with the answer there. It just seems to reinforce the point that this is quite a large revenue stream which the County Council intends to use for its infrastructure schemes throughout the county, and that the requirement for 15% of the money to be allocated by local people for what local people want and for what schemes local people think are important will be overridden under this arch of strategy. Let's have a strategic decision. Let's use the money more sensibly. Let's build it countrywide. But that's my concerns. Obviously, there's a difference of opinion. If I can move on, Chair, unless people want to comment on that particular point.
I think Kelly just wants to briefly come back in, if that's all right, and then we'll move on to your second point.
If I can, Chair, very briefly, I think, Councillor Hayward, what you're saying about local decision-making is exactly what Whole Place is all about. It's not about the County Council retaining power and making decisions for communities. It's actually about devolving that power to them. So if you take a Better Brunnicombe, for example, that plan has been prepared from the ground up with the community. We don't run the programme board, the community does. The town team is its own community interest company. So we can guide and we can facilitate. But as the community have already identified their strategic priorities, I think in the case of SIL, we've got to go back to those groups, to the community, and say, okay, you've got your priorities, there's some resource here, and our job is purely to ensure that they're spending it in accordance with those identified priorities. So I see our role in this being much more an enabling and facilitating one, rather than being a direct delivery agent or the council saying, you must do this, you must do it in this way, this is the way we want to see you spend your money. I think it's a role reversal almost, and it's about freedom, autonomy and independence, and I think they're quite key principles for us to talk about this morning.
Okay, Councillor Hayward, do you want to move into your second?
I think we're going to beg to differ on that one, because I still heard identified priorities, which is the table in 1, 2, 3, and that's a county council table, but we just argue this forever and ever. If I can just move on. The other thing is the viability assessment. If I can just ask a question first, because I noticed that in the table on page 32 of our papers, Wannostow Road is down with a SIL rate of £60 per square metre. But I thought I heard the officer say that the SIL will be collected when planning permission is given. And we all know that planning permission, albeit outline planning permission, has been given for Wannostow Road already. So why is Wannostow Road still in that table?
Well, it's in the table because, at the time that the viability study was carried out, we didn't know when planning permission would be granted. So it's in as a potential SIL payer if for some reason planning permission was delayed or it didn't go forward. But as you say, it is very close to being approved now. It's subject to Section 106, in which case Section 106 money would apply. And the fact that it's quoted in the table would be irrelevant then, because it'd be superseded by a planning permission before the SIL regs come into effect. So, you know, at the moment, it's part of Wannister Road. The allocated site is getting subject to the planning application. Perhaps at the end of next year, then the next phase, the Druin Farm phase, would come forward, in which case it would be subject to SIL. So I think it has to be mentioned as an allocation in the LDP, albeit that events are overtaking the SIL schedule now. And when planning permission is granted, which looks like imminent in the next few weeks once 106 is signed, then SIL won't apply to that part of the Wannister Road development.
Okay, I'm not sure that was explained to the planning committee at the time that the decision was taken. However, if we just move on, if we assume the planning permission, because obviously the planning committee have taken the decision, but it hasn't been stamped and sealed yet. If we assume that there was going to be a SIL adjustment, then there's got to be a viability assessment to see whether the scheme is liable. Now, that's already been done on Sudbuck Paper Mill, and they said it's not viable. How can a viability assessment be made when the land value isn't known? Because obviously what the developer paid for the land is key on whether he can turn a profit over with the end of the development. And we all know, for instance, that Wannister Road is the subject of an inquiry by the Wales Audit Committee, because that land was originally sold by the Welsh Government. It went to a series of buyers. It's then been purchased by Welsh Land Development or something. And we know that there's a clawback agreement with the Welsh Government, but the developer hasn't disclosed what that clawback agreement is. So we do not know what the developer paid for that site. How can you do a viability assessment without knowing the cost of the land that the developer has paid?
Well, the viability assessment is based on finding out all the costs that go into development and then working out the value that can be obtained by the sale of the houses. And it estimates then a profit that can be made from the site. And it's based on a benchmark value. This is something which was debated extensively at the LDP inquiry in terms of affordable housing. The benchmark value that they establish is what is felt to be, in general terms, a value which would incentivize a landowner to bring the land forward. And so it's based on theoretical values, but values that are based on strong evidence on what land has been, what prices land has been changing hands at, and what value can be obtained from the sale of the properties. So it's a theoretical value, which is something which will be debated with the developers, I'm sure, in the examination on SIL, but it's based on a general requirement that, and the consultants have established a benchmark value which they feel is appropriate and can be defended on at an examination as sufficient to bring land forward for development. So it's based on general terms. No, we wouldn't go into what the landowner actually paid for the land, because ideally a landowner would be taking into account all the policies that are in the LDP, or a land purchaser taking into account all the policies in the LDP, estimating what his costs are and basing his bid for the value of the land on that. So it's a general term, and I think, you know, the actual sale of the land at Wannister, which is irrelevant anyway in terms of where SIL is going to come into effect. You know, that isn't looked at. It's based on a theoretical land value. And it's a land value that consultants feel can be defended examination. It's be defended elsewhere. And it was defended at the LDP examination in relation to affordable housing viability.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hayward. If I may, I've just got one quick question, and it's regarding timescales. I mean, there's a lot of work that needs to be undertaken to enable this to potentially be adopted and implemented by, I think, is it July 2015 we're looking at? And at the same time, we're looking at the changes to Section 106 in April 2015. Is there potential for any impact on us? Is there any threat there from the fact that we won't have this adopted by the time the April 2015 date comes around for the Section 106 changes?
I don't think there should be, because the main infrastructure requirements in terms of the Section 106, in terms of the strategic sites, are related to those strategic sites. So that is one single piece of infrastructure that we are not looking for more than one development to make a contribution to. It's something we need to be careful about, but to date we are not particularly using what Section 106 money towards single pieces of infrastructure. There is one instance, for instance, a High Beach roundabout in Chepstow. There are improvements needed on that, and that really is something that all development in Chepstow in theory should contribute to. So in that case we would need SIL in place to achieve those improvements. But I think that is quite rare in the county at the moment, and the way the LDP is set out, because you've got individual strategic sites that can be brought forward by 106s.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wintle.
Thank you, Chair. I've just this document is going out to consultation. You've only got draft on the initial cover page, and nowhere else in this document it says draft. I'm concerned that people might even keep this and say, "Oh, I've got the document now." It's quite possible nothing will change. The other documents in the RDP didn't change, so what's going to change with this?
Well, two of the documents do have draft written on them. The actual, as I said in my preamble, the charging schedule is a draft of a preliminary draft charging schedule. It's a draft for you and the council ultimately to consider, and it is called a preliminary. That is the technical term in the regulations, and that will change then to becoming a draft charging schedule under the terms of the regulations. But at the moment, it is draft for the council's internal purposes. The guidance note on my copy, which I think is the one that's on the internet, also has draft on it. That is not a statutory document. That is just an explanation of how the SIL process operates, and that will be changed as we go forward. As questions are raised, and we think, oh, we've been good to explain that. So that is actually called draft. The part that isn't called draft is the SIL viability assessment, which is the biggest, bulkiest part of the information you've been given. And that is a final report. It's a final report that the consultants prepared for us. And it's for us to decide as whether we want to take those recommendations on board, us as a council, and put them into the charging schedule. So that certainly isn't the draft. That is the consultant's final report. And that will go out mainly so that everybody, but developers in particular, can look at the assumptions that have been taken into account in establishing the viability of particular sites. So in general, because there's a lot of generic viability testing as well. So that's available for developers and landowners to look at. And if they want to question those assumptions, they've got the right to do so. But it is a final report, and any changes that they request or that we agree with will then be made to the preliminary draft charging schedule before it becomes a draft charging schedule that goes forward to examination.
Does that mean then, well, will all the councillors will receive this final document, and we can sort of just put this one away?
Yes. Yeah. Well, the first two documents, the charging schedule and the guidance notes, there will probably be a slightly different version going to planning committee, cabinet, and council as we refine it over the next few weeks. So the council will be asked to make a decision on documents that may be slightly changed from what you've shown now. But then that decision of council, that would go out for consultation, and we will take on board what comments are raised and have to take it back to council again to determine a document that just then go forward for examination.
Okay, Councillor Duffy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to go back, if I might, to the area that Councillor Prosser raised, and this is the allocation, how these funds are allocated. and the process. And the area that really concerns me is where the funds that are available might be used elsewhere, particularly when it applies to a development, a housing development. I suppose you could say something like Wanstow Road, where it's been fiercely fought, and the local population are not particularly happy with the end result and what has been agreed in the LDP. So that is the point I wish to have clear in my mind, that the process really does take account of the fact that maybe the local populace would be less than very happy if due regard to their concerns wasn't taken into account when we make these decisions. I'd like the processes to be clear, and I'm not clear what those processes are going to be from what we've heard. And are we going to get that come in front of us?
Yes, I think ultimately you would. You know, I didn't answer Councillor Prosser's question very well because I'm not clear myself. It's not, you know, I see my role as getting this off the ground, the procedures for people other than myself to decide upon. But I think George and Kelly then both, you know, answered perhaps more eloquently than I did. And as Kelly said, it would be based on consultation with the local communities and through the whole place plans as well. You know, that is something that can feed into the infrastructure plan and both documents or processes influence each other. So I think it is important. I would agree that it is important that the local community has a voice in how the money is spent. And I think Kelly set out the processes by which that would take place.
Councillor Dovey, is there anything you wanted to follow up?
I wasn't criticising your response. I just wanted to make sure we got the process was clear and we understood it, and it really did take regard to particular circumstances in the areas where these developments are going to take place.
Thank you. Yes, George.
Yes, if I can just embellish what's been said, that in terms of the negotiations underway at the moment on Wanstow Road, for example, then, as is typical with large sites, the recreation money, the adult recreation money, is almost certainly going to be spent off-site rather than within the site, because sites don't provide for that type of recreation. So there has to be a mechanism whereby that money is spent sensibly. And to echo what Kelly Burns said, in the past there's been a tendency to have lots of small schemes dotted around, which perhaps isn't best for the community. So what we need to ensure is that when sizable sums of money, in accordance with the Council's agreed charging schedule on adult recreation, for example, become available, that they are spent in the way that benefits the community as much as possible. So where there is a whole place plan and town teams have been set up and so on, then there are lots of opportunities for consultations. My colleague Ian Saunders, sitting in the back as well, will doubtless be heavily involved in the discussions on how that money can be spent. So as I say, it will take account of community aspirations. It will be spent locally, but it will be done in a coordinated, strategic way for the towns and major settlements, so that the money is spent and put to the best possible effect. And as has been said earlier on as well, I think that I would hope that the eventual 1, 2, 3 schedule and so on, you know, the mechanism by which this SIL funding is distributed will be able to explicitly take account of the existence of whole place plans, town teams and so on. So again, the consultation mechanisms are very clear and explicit for the public to understand, so that again, that SIL money is spent in the best possible way. So these are details I think which will be elaborated on as this process unfolds, but hopefully by the time we get to an examination, then we will actually have documents in place on behalf of the council which will give clarity as to the council's intended priorities and mechanisms by which the money is to be distributed. Thank you.
Thank you for that, George. I've got Councillor White to speak on Wonostow Road, and then Councillor Prosser. If there's any other members that haven't spoken that would like to speak, then please let me know, and including Councillor Smith and Webb. Sorry, I didn't welcome you to the meeting. If you'd like to speak once the members have had the opportunity to do so, and then we'll look to wrap up within the next 10 minutes, if that's okay. So, Councillor White.
Thank you very much. I've been told I am allowed to speak. I haven't been allowed to speak in other meetings, but I do declare an interest on the Wonostow Road, naturally. The only hope I've ever seen in all of this terrible struggle that we've had between us over the last few years is that the end of it, my ward might be able to put some of the damage right that this is going to cause. I've heard lots of speeches before and lots of promises, and I really want to know that this is what's going to happen, because people think they're going to damage our ward, but we might have some money to put some of it right. And they're hoping on that, and they're hanging on that, and I don't want that to be scuttled at the 11th hour, because damage it's going to do, and there's a lot of damage that's got to be put right.
Yes, we don't want to reopen the debates on the sort of merits of the sites, but Wonostow Road, I hope, will be seen to bring benefits. We're already in discussion with potential developers for the employment land, so that there will be jobs locally, which will be a huge benefit, I hope, to the residents of your ward. The site itself will provide recreation within it, even if the adult recreation monies go elsewhere in Monmouth Town, and your ward would have a call on that money as well, I guess, but in discussion, looking at the whole place and so on. In terms of flood prevention and so on, again, the scheme has to guarantee and satisfy Natural Resources Wales and the Drainage Board as well, that it won't exacerbate flooding and indeed will hopefully better the flooding situation, which will again be a benefit for local residents. So in all these aspects, I hope that the site will deliver benefits, although I accept that local residents feel unhappy about having to accommodate so much new housing and employment development in your ward. Thank you.
I'll come to Councillor Prosser, then Councillor Hayward, but if you don't mind, I'll just go to Councillor Edwards first, if that's okay, because he's yet to have the opportunity to speak. So, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just be fairly simplistic? As I understand it, then, Section 106 will essentially be spent in the site, but still, 15% will be given over to the local authority, in other cases, Winniston Road, will probably be Monmouth Town Council, and the rest of it can be spent anywhere else in the county. Is that simplistic?
In theory, yes. But, obviously the council has it within its gift to ensure that the target for those funds is the location where the development is taking place. But the way the regs are written do say that it could be spent anywhere. But it's for the council to decide its priorities in association with local communities.
Chair, I got no axe to grind with that percentage. It's something like 85% of silk being spent elsewhere. It would obviously be more beneficial within in the immediate area. For argument's sake, Derry View, there'll be a considerable sum going to the Nantilly-Patholi Community Council, but I'd like to think that a fair whack of the 85% that's of Sill would actually be spent in the Abergavenny area or the Brynny Cwm area at the outside.
But I think it's worth saying that the timetables for the large sites are such that I would very much hope they will actually have planning permissions before SIL comes into force. So the council won't lose out because Section 106 money will be maximised from the sites, and that's what we're already discussing, as was agreed by Planning Committee in relation to Wonostow Road. When the Dairy Farm application comes in, which I hope will be soon in revised form, because we already have an outline application in for Dairy Farm, then again the discussions will look at, for example, recreation, and as is commonly the case, it's almost certain that the adult recreation will be available for the wider community. So there will be the debates through the whole place planning process and so on as to how best to spend that money, so that the community will be seen to benefit from the developments in terms of decisions as to how recreation and other money is spent. Obviously, there are very large site-specific costs in relation to that site, which include the undergrounding of the overhead power lines. But again, I hope that will be seen as a benefit to the community, as we discussed with Councillor White. So, in relation to Wanstow Road, so there will be direct benefits. There will be other, let's say, involvements of the public in how the money is spent on adult recreation, for example. There will be off-site highway improvements, etc., etc. So all of those will take place through the normal planning process. Thank you.
Kelly, did you want to come in briefly and then we'll move to Councillor Possum?
Just very, very quickly, if I can, please, Chair. I think one of the things that probably needs to be said is that obviously, year on year, we've been facing very difficult budget reductions. And I think that whilst, some of the news around local government at the moment is very bleak, we know we're looking at a 4.3% reduction next year, which is significant. I mean, for me, it means a third, at least a quarter of my total budget will disappear. And I think we have to see SIL as an opportunity, yes, because it's one of the main areas that's going to bring money and investment into our communities. But to put the whole thing really into starker context, if at a local level communities are going to start to lose services, we yesterday Cabinet approved a report on cultural services and potentially a very different future for our cultural services. If we're going to have to look differently at leisure centres, which we know we are, I think it sort of puts into stark contrast some of the decisions and opportunities that we're going to have around SIL. And whilst we've looked at Section 106 as an opportunity and we've all had our shopping lists, I think we've got a duty with SIL to be much more strategic about how we use it. And that isn't the council making decisions, it's about the community making decisions in the context of what local service provision is likely to look like in the future. So I would urge you as members not to see this as just an opportunity to top up recreation and to look at new things that we may want to do in communities, but just put it in stark focus really with what is potentially going to be lost over the next couple of years.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick general question. Level of charges. I'm just curious how our charges compare to other authorities, potentially drafts. For example, Cardiff, Powys, Bristol. I mean, are we a tenth of theirs? Are we double theirs? I just want to know where we fit in the spectrum of charges, because obviously that dictates where developers want to go.
Well, in terms of the Welsh situation, there's only three authorities have adopted SIL, is Caerphilly, Merthyr Tydfil and Rhondda Cynon Taf. Caerphilly are looking at 3 zones where the charges are £25 and £40 per square metre. Merthyr Tydfil have got 2 zones, £0 and £25 per square metre. And Rhondda Cynon Taf have got 3 zones, which is £0, £40 and £85 per square metre. And the £85 per square metre, I think, is the southern part of Rhondda Cynon Taf, which is closest to Cardiff, where the land values would be best. So if you think we're proposing £60 per square metre for our strategic sites on Sevenside, and they're areas where the values, land values are lower. But then we've got £110 per square metre in the rest of the county, where there are very good land values and can support a higher charge. So I think in terms of the Welsh authorities that have gone through the process, I don't see any major conflict there with what we're proposing and what they've adopted. Our other neighbours in Wales, well, they haven't gone through the process yet. I think I'm not sure what it is on the other side of the border, but I don't think the Forest has got a charge yet, but some of the other councils I think are in preliminary stages, and Bristol perhaps has got an adopted SIL charge. I don't know exactly what they are, but I think in terms of Welsh authorities, then I think we are comparing favourably. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I need to come back because I'm still absolutely confused. Since I last spoke, I've heard officers say, yes, 15% will be given to community councils, and I've heard other officers say, no, it'll all be decided by your county, whole place, and it'll be strategically spent, and it's an opportunity to increase the budget because you've been in a shortfall. Now, I accept here that all the strategic sites probably won't attract SIL because planning permission will be in place. But in 2021, we will have to have a new local development plan in place. I don't want to presuppose what will be in that plan. It might be the same sort of strategy. It might still be big sites, and those big sites might, in fact, not be in the major towns. They might be in small villages, and you might get the instance, say, for example, Tintern or Trelloch, might be allocated 300 or 400 houses. I am still unclear, will someone like Trelloch, and remember Trelloch is in an area at the moment that doesn't have York County whole place, it hasn't been spread into the Central Mon area yet, but Trelloch is very close to Monmouth. Tintern could be said to be close to Chepstow. Will those community councils have any control over the 15%? Will they be said, that is your money, you tell us where you want it spent or what type of infrastructure project will be spent, or will they be told, no, it's all part of your county whole place, which for Trelloch would be in Monmouth because of the association, Tintern would probably be in Chepstow, and they will be told, no, your contribution will go towards those strategic plans which are in place for those areas. Because the paper quite clearly, we were told originally, and the first time when SIL was mentioned, that clearly this was 15%, almost like an incentive to encourage community councils to adopt housing plans for buildings in there and to compensate them for the lack of infrastructure or for the strain that those houses will put on their communities, and therefore 15% would be given to them to alleviate that strain. Or will we be told, no, you must look much broader than that and think of the area and your surrounding districts, and you will just have a contribution the same as the people, the town councillors in Chepstow or the town councillors in Monmouth will have towards where that money is spent. Who will make that decision? I've heard two answers. One, it'll be given to the local community councils, and the other is it'll be decided by your county, your place, where they will just have a minor input. Can please we have absolute clarification on this, because we'll be deciding on this and it'll be with us for a long, long time.
I was going to say, by way of response, it needs to be clarified, and I would trust that that clarification will be arrived at by the time we get to the examination on the document, because we need to be as clear as we possibly can as a council in promoting a scheme as to the mechanisms whereby that money will be spent and who decides. I think that's a crucial part. So I would seek to ensure, and I'm sure that all colleagues here today will seek to ensure, that clarity is provided by the time we get to the end of the process, so that the inspector, when he or she decides what's acceptable, will know the mechanism by which the money is to be spent. And just one final point, in terms of the next plan, then of course this whole process is subject to review. So were we in a world where a small village was suddenly to be expanded almost to sort of new village proportions, new town proportions in Monmouthshire, then I would expect the whole of the charging schedule and so on to reflect that difference. So that you as councillors, again, in years to come, will be able to redetermine what the best approach is, taking account of the new strategy of the reviewed LDP. So as I say, this won't be a tablet of stone which will apply come what may to the next review of the plan. The two will change together. Thank you.
I'd just like to make a point then on that. I think as a committee we'd like to be kept very much fully informed of this on a step-by-step process as it goes forward. We'd like the opportunity for this to come back to this committee. Are you able to give us some timescales, particularly once you have that clarification around the 15% of the process around that, when this could come back to us?
Well, George mentioned the examination. Before we go to examination, I think it is something we could do a bit of research on now. And as I said, you know, it's a new thing in Wales. I doubt if very much if it's much has happened in the three councils I just mentioned. In England, the 15% has come out of the localism agenda, where community councils or parishes as they are, they set up their own plans. You know, they prepare plans themselves, and if they're prepared to take a development, they get that funding as an incentive. So my view would be that it'd be for the community council to decide that 15%. But perhaps if I see clarification and
If you could keep us
certainly
posted, yeah.
before the next before we get too far down the line.
Down the next stage. Yeah, we'll put it onto our action list to make sure that it's for us to keep a close eye on in liaison with you, obviously. So very briefly then, Bob.
Yes, Chair, could I also ask the clerk to put it in quite a lot of detail into the minutes, because often councillors will look back at the minutes before the next paper. So if you could put the detail in and the exact questions and responses we had, so that it'll be clear in the future as a reference document when we refer back to this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to check before I go to the Cabinet member, are there any members, non-members of the committee who wanted to speak? Not Councillor Webb. Councillor Smith?
Very briefly, Chairman, I think that the SIL proposals are something that I've long advocated and spoken to George about over the years. What I do hope that if the scheme is implemented, which I think it should be, I trust there'll be the flexibility to equitably use the monies raised in conjunction with the town and community councils. There must be the local input, particularly looking at rural areas. So it's a scheme that I thought should have been there a long time ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Unless there's any burning questions then from the rest of the committee. Councillor Dovey then briefly before we move on.
Thank you, Chairman. You made one of the points that I wanted, but I wanted to also to be sure that this is the recommendations about how this should be implemented within the county. That will go before a full council for acceptance. I would like to add to that we would want to review, I believe, we would want to review the process as it is going along, so it shouldn't be cast in stone. This is new, it's very important, we've got to get it to work properly and the community to be carried along with it. It shouldn't be divisive. So I would want it to be checked as it goes along, if you like, or reviewed to make sure it's fit for purpose.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dovey. And then I'll just ask Councillor Greenland, did you want to sum up anything?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, and to confirm that the decision on how it will be, these monies will be spent, will be put before Council for ratification. But this is how I see it at the moment. And I'll use the example of Trelloc that has just been used. People who move into new houses, and there are just some being built in Trelloc, will clearly use some of the facilities in the town, in the village. They may use the village hall. But as well as that, they are likely to go out and use facilities. In the case of Trelloc, the nearest town is Monmouth, so they may well use a football club, bowls club, or maybe the gym in our leisure centre. So those are appropriate areas where we can put money into development that will actually be of service to the people who are moving into those houses. Now, we know that our services are under pressure. We know that particularly non-mandatory services such as leisure services are under pressure. So if those are going to decrease in their budgets, and the service is not going to come up to the standards that we might wish, then is it not appropriate that some of the money that is going to be bought through these agreements should be spent on improving the facilities that will be used by the people that go into that village? Now, that's the sort of question and the sort of decisions that we're going to have to come to in the future. But how we deal with this is eventually going to be a decision that will come through Cabinet with a recommendation, probably, no doubt, from Cabinet as it goes.
Okay, thank you. I think that was a very useful session. There was a number of very pertinent questions raised by our members. I think we've got more clarity now on the differences between Section 106 and SIL. Clearly there are concerns which I'm sure which will be clarified by you, which our members will want to be continuously engaged on at every point. That will be reflected in the minutes and the action list. So thank you very much. And we'll move on to agenda item number 6, sorry. Yeah. The officers that are presenting on this, can you come down to the front, please? Okay, thanks Ian and Dan for the paper that you've presented to us. Have you got a PowerPoint, or are you just going to give us a brief update?
We're just going to give an update.
Yeah, if you could do that, and I think it's quite an opportunity here for us to have quite a sort of discursive item, really, to try and add value, because I know there's a number of questions you've asked from us as a committee.
Yeah.
So if you want to just present that paper then, and then we'll go into a debate and scrutiny.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. It's a welcome opportunity to bring forward this discussion paper around the formulation of a new event strategy for Monmouthshire, something I think is well needed and necessary, just to capture some of the fabulous activity going on out in our wonderful county. We've got some huge signature events, some growth events. We've also got opportunities in many niche markets, and we've also got opportunities to really get some specialism in this area. I think some of the recent activity that we've put forward with cycling, and obviously some of the events that move through Monmouthshire, such as food festivals, just really give a flavour of some of the fabulous activity out there. And I think we've really got to focus on this, and it's a big opportunity as a council to establish some really wonderful opportunities. So we've put the background together. One of the main aspects when we talk to Welsh Government major events team about funding and being able to apply for funding is we haven't actually got a strategy, and it's the first question they ask us is, where is your strategy, where's your vision? So, we need to formulate that. We need to have some mission statement and also some aspirational document that we can deliver. But through that, obviously, one of the key things we need to understand is how we actually evaluate our events as well. So I think there's many different ways that we can do that. When you look at some of the policies that are out there, some of the bigger cities that have got major events teams and how they're evaluating their events is quite interesting. There are also some toolkits that we can use and develop skills from the tourism sector and our own events team. And the other issue that we have got is we have not got a major events team. We've got officers that are all working extremely hard. Capacity is, as you are aware, as members, capacity is stretched, and these officers are working above and beyond existing remits to help deliver some great events. And I've noticed over this year in particular, people have gone above and beyond their remits to help Monmouthshire deliver. So again, there's many reasons for putting this paper in front of you. And I'll just hand over to Dan just to give a flavour of some of the events that he's got planned in, and some of the opportunities ahead of us before we come back for some questions.
Good morning, thank you. I think it's really important that we recognise that events in Monmouthshire aren't just necessarily the ones that we put on, and actually when we formulate an event strategy, it's extremely important that we recognise that the events don't just get planned within these four walls that we're sat in, and we have extreme kind of animation and excitement and energy found in the communities right across the county. And when we're talking about events like Devorden Music Festival with Jeremy, or Abergavenny Food Festival, which attracts thousands of people to the county, right down through to things like Castle Rock in Chepstow Castle, we could go on forever. And I think it's so important for us as a county to recognise that, but equally just as important for us to be how we can be the enabler, we can lend a hand, and almost that we become a natural partner to be able to support and flourish these events so that they can develop into something that they need to be. I think there's no doubt that we all recognise the value of staging things like this. I just think we need to have a strategy behind us so that we can evaluate it successfully, so we know what we're doing right and what we can improve on, but also how we can really use them to sing the songs of the county. Ian touched on that we have a number of events coming up which we're doing to develop our network in terms of how we stage these things. The biggest probably staging with John at Caldecott Castle in terms of a remembrance event, which as an opportunity is significant. Only kind of things happen and progress by the day, but it's exciting to work on them. And if I could only capture the excitement of something like Caldicot Male Voice Choir, we would pay this over tens and tens, because the value that they see these in the community which they're living in is immense. So something like putting 1,500 community people into Caldicot Castle to an act of memorial and remembrance, whilst giving an entertainment value, but also so this is an opportunity to generate income so we can pay for these events themselves. It's great that we're in a position to be able to work with local businesses, because the event that we're staging in Caldicot Castle is completely provided by people who trade in Monmouthshire. And I think that's a huge asset for us to be able to claim. So that whilst that one event is happening, we can dress things around that significant event, because the weekend before we'll do a firework display at the castle, and when we're talking about lights and infrastructure and staging and speakers, it's really useful for us to wrap all that up together so we can do it really cost effectively. We're using the same equipment for both weekends, and that means that we can get 7,000 people at a real good cost to come in and watch a firework display, something that is almost exciting the whole of that community. Our challenge is now to spread that support and that way of thinking across the county to other local organisers, and we're constantly having those conversations with those people to see how the council can enable them. We haven't got bags of money to give them, but what we have got is resource. I think what we've also got is that opportunity to make it seamless for them in an authority or an organisation, which can sometimes be a bit of a pain in what they're doing, mostly because we don't have that same understanding. So I think that's the role of this strategy, is how we become a lending hand to these people, whilst being regulatory to them, so that we are legal. But actually we become this body which is supportive and developing.
Thanks, Ian and Dan. That's really helpful. I think, I suppose it's because I come from a comms background and possibly because it's private sector, but I'm quite surprised we don't have an event strategy, particularly given the impact it could have in terms of revenue generation and also raising profile, given the fact that we've got such a brilliant platform to do so within our county. So it's great that it's coming forward now. I think if I could just ask one question before I open up to members, is why now? The Welsh Government's had a major event strategy for 4 years, over 4 years running now. It's coming up for review next year. Is there any reason why, is it the right time for us to be doing this in terms of the review that's going to take place in 2015 from the Welsh Government's perspective? And how does it all link together with national event strategy?
I think it's exactly the right time to be doing it, in view of the way the direction of the council's going as well, with destination plan, which we might touch on as well. We've also got the Usk plan that's coming out, so it's a good time to be really thinking about our strategy, some of our lines that we're talking about, food capital of Wales, cycling capital of Wales. It is the right time to be having an events team that can really push forward, and I think it would be difficult to have an events team formalised without a strategy to deliver. So I think it is exactly the right time to be doing it.
Councillor White.
Thank you. Yes, I think we really need a strategy, because obviously in my ward it didn't work when the cycling went through. Nobody spoke to me. Nobody spoke to all the businesses on the route, and certainly no one spoke to the church. And we had 3 churches that were inconvenienced on the Sunday it came through. It spoilt all their service times because people couldn't come to and get from the churches. I thought that was very poor for my county. I only noticed it when I was scrolling through on the internet and I thought, golly, I don't know anything about this. So luckily I rang the vicar in time so that we could get people, because we had a special church service that Sunday. But it really did upset a lot of people. So I'm glad you're going to get a plan together to do this strategy, and then we can work together, because yes, we do pop up and do things. We're doing a walk in Monmouth to commemorate the World War I, because our forefathers walked from the castle where they had enlisted down to the station which we had in those days. And we're going to reenact that in their memory. and I'm really looking forward to that. Luckily, some of us have been trained on road closures and stewarding, so we don't have to put a lot of expense there. So that's just one thing that's coming up that's very important. We don't want it to go wrong. Work very hard to make sure it doesn't. And I'm sure there are going to be many, many more where we will need your input legally and health and safety. But the community is quite good at doing its own things. But when you bring these big ones into the county, please consult.
Thank you for that. Thank you for the feedback. Obviously, there were some areas that we didn't do well, and we accept that. But as a team in general, the event, I'm guessing you're talking about the first National Road Race Championship on a Sunday. In fairness, there was an awful lot of consultation that did happen with communities and businesses. The churches on the route were informed, or were at least written to. So I guess there's some things we can learn from you. Yeah, but appreciate one of the things that we are trying to formulate is a calendar of events, which I think, if it's well publicised, that these are the events going on inside Monmouthshire, because we've got festivals, it's so vibrant now. There's so much going on. You are right. There's such a mixed amount of different things going on in different communities. It's definitely getting that programme together, and then who is doing the consultation and the engagement with the local communities. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that approach.
Before I move to Councillor Williams, Kelly, did you just want to come in on that point specifically?
Yeah, only very quickly, Chair, if I could, just to say that when we did stage the Road Race Championships, I don't know if you'll recall, we did have a full members seminar. Councillor Greenland, I know as Cabinet Member, wrote out to all members. I wrote out to all staff. The affected town and community councils were visited. Every single resident in an identified radius received a personal letter to their home address. So really, I don't know how much more, given the limited capacity that we had to run that we could have done. And I would say as well that the recent evaluation we've had done of the Road Race Championships showed that we brought 40,000 people into Monmouthshire over that weekend. And of that 40,000, I myself directly received four complaints.
Councillor Williams?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the problems I have with this cycling thing that happened on Sunday, I'm elected member for Llanwenneth Ultra, which is basically Gavilan, and it affects my ward particularly due to the tumble, which goes straight through the middle of it. As an elected member, I felt that I didn't have a clue what was going on with it. The first I really picked up on it was when I had a call off a local businessman who said, I'm not going to get deliveries coming to me. I've just had this landed on me. He didn't show any sort of awareness of it whatsoever. I had to get somebody to go and speak to him because he was told, well, there's a road going down over from the top of the Keepers down into Gavilan. Now, that road hasn't been maintained by this authority virtually since it's been in existence. There are holes there big enough to bury an elephant in. It's got a 300 to 500 foot drop on the one side, and it's a single track road. There are livestock wandering it. I mean, to suggest, like the Highways Department did, that you can use that as a way in and way out is ludicrous. And I think that there needs to be a lot more consultation with local members and people in the community up that area, because it's particularly sparse, the top of the tumble. You've only got about 4 things up there. You've got the pub, the Outward Bound Centre, and 2 farms, I think it is. And they were all unaware of what was going on. The guy that's run the Lamb and Fox pub has got severe care issues. He's elderly now, and he's relying on carers getting in and out. And they were worried up until the day before whether these carers would be allowed in. And I think there needs to be a lot more consultation with local members and some of the local people to understand these things before we sort of go for it, in other words.
Yeah, I agree with the whole what you said there. And there was a lot of conversations with the local community up there, and there were concerns from the residents. And in view of the fact that the Velathon is coming across there next summer, which is a massive across Gwent, there's going to be more usage of the tumble area, and we need to make sure that the communities around there feel that whilst there will be some disruption to their normal life, we've got to just make sure that is minimal, and they understand the whole process and what is actually going to happen. So I take on board what you said.
And to top that off, we need to make these cycle organisers aware of things like dropping the red cable ties on the floor, because there was numerous ones of those there, and I had a farmer complain to me about the danger to livestock, and it is quite prominent, you know, and it needs to be sorted and it needs to be addressed before these events take place.
Thanks for that, Councillor Williams. Councillor Edwards and then Councillor Hayward. Prosser.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Picking up on what Kevin has said, I must admit I've had the opposite view, because in my ward I was fully aware of what was going on, the closures in all the various streets. All I can say is to Kevin is it must be that the officer in question who issues all these notices didn't take onto account that the race was going out into the... He must have known it was going out into the country, and I cannot understand why he didn't send all the necessary information to you or to any other member in the whole of the Brynnicombe area, or even to every county councillor. There's no reason why, by email, that every county councillor shouldn't receive that information. I certainly had it, and it's mainly because obviously Grofield Ward is very much involved in the town centre. I presume that John, who represents the Priory Ward, which is the other side of the main street, probably had the same thing. What I would say to you, Ian, and to Dan, isn't it? The town, many of us actually represent town councils as well as being county councillors, and certainly Abergavenny has a lot of items going on, and I think you should come and meet us and talk about some of the things that are going on. I know that there's a particular gentleman in Abergavenny, he is in the process, he's done it now 2 years running, he's run a jazz festival with extreme difficulty, and I think this is a gentleman that needs some help, and I think it could be a very successful event. Very knowledgeable, he regularly runs jazz sessions in various hotels around the town, but I think the jazz, he actually put his money where his mouth this year and actually ran a festival for the full weekend. It's a big outlay, and you know, every little bit of help that he could get from some people like yourself would be much appreciated. But I do recommend that you contact all the town councils and maybe the community councils, and to find out exactly what is going on and where possibly your expertise would make them a much more exciting event.
Yep, thank you. That's good feedback, and we'll make sure we in the strategy we've got a whole area about consultation, the environment, sustainability, so that they will all be factored into the strategy. So it's great feedback that we're receiving. Thank you.
I think on that point, it'd be great to develop, and you can't be too prescriptive when it comes to events, obviously they have to be tailored, but a toolkit which, so that any new members of the team as well, they can follow that toolkit and make sure that every bit is followed and everyone's engaged with it at every stage that's relevant. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this paper. I realise the paper isn't a strategy, it's a discussion paper about the strategy, and the strategy still needs to be developed, and I think it's right and proper that we have to have it. There's a few things I find that aren't addressed in here. We all know how important tourism is to the county. We're told it's the biggest employer, it contributes roughly about 145, 146 million pounds to the economy each year. But that figure has been fairly stationary for the last 6 or 7 years. It's been stuck in the 140 millions. It doesn't appear to be growing. And I think a strategy like this, an event strategy, will enable that figure to grow. We know that single events, we heard that 40,000 people came to see the cycle race. We don't know what effect that had on the strategy. We do know that the Ryder Cup came here 4 years ago, very close down to Celtic Manor, and the following year the income from tourism actually fell, and we haven't recovered to levels prior to the Ryder Cup coming here. So even though it was trailed as the third biggest event in the world, the biggest sporting event, and we all talked about the Ryder Cup legacy that we were going to have, it didn't actually come through in the figures. And I think it's right that we have a strategy where we're saying it is not one single event. We're not concentrating on the cycling around Abergavenny. We're not concentrating on this. We're trying to make Monmouthshire a tourist destination because we recognise the importance of tourism, and we want tourism to flourish. And the way to get that is so that people, when they think on a bank holiday, what's happening around the country, they're going to say, oh, Monmouthshire always has something going on. Let's see what's happening down there and tap into the various web sources and all the rest. So that I am happy with. I'm also happy to hear Dan say that what we're going to supply is not necessarily money but resources, because I think at this time where we're talking about cutting leisure centres and taking still money off local community councils, etc. I think it's right that we're not subsidising national organisations to the tune of thousands and thousands of pounds to put events on in the county when we don't have any proof that it's benefiting the general economy of the county at the moment. I think we need to have the strategy in place. I think we need to introduce a variety of events. I think we need to support organisations that want to bring the events in. So we need to put the resource in. We need to get the experience of putting the events on. We need to satisfy the local community that we're not going to disturb life too much, but obviously there's going to be, the event's not going to be eye-catching unless there is some disturbance. And then we need to monitor it on the outturn of what those events are bringing to the economy of Monmouthshire. And we need to have continuous monitoring. If it doesn't make any difference, then we need to be saying either these events are taken from traditional forms of tourism, or they're just not working, or we need to drill down and find what the answers are. But generally, I support this. I think it's right that we have a strategy, and I welcome the paper and look forward to the strategy when it comes out. Thank you.
I thank you, Chair. I suppose I have to declare an interest here because I'm the chairman of the council and I end up fronting a lot of these events, but I do feel it's non-prejudicial in the analysis of this strategy. Basically, I applaud all that's been done to date because, I mean, when we had all these road races and we had European television going around all the lanes of beautiful Monmouthshire, and people were saying, well, what a wonderful county that is. Why don't we go and pay it a visit? It must be saying that somewhere. So I applaud that's what's happened to date. But in the fine analysis of putting a strategy together, one of the first things when in austere financial times is they always go for the non-statutory items and they go for the leisures and those sorts of activities. So I would say any strategy you have, really you need to generate funds to cover your own costs as well. Because I want you to exist forever and a day, right? And, you know, we all get put against financial pressures. So I would say it's got to be income generating, not only for the event, but for yourselves as well, in that sense, to sustain you as a team. The other one was insurance and underwriting of events, because they can be quite costly. And you could catch a severe cold if you're not careful on various events. So in the strategy, you have to have some kind of insurance device that says, in the event of, it will be covered by. Yeah, and the other one is really the local community, which has already been covered. You have to make sure it's effective engagement with the local community. You've got to test yourself all the time. Don't assume that everyone's had a letter. You know, you've got to test yourself. And the other thing is to spread the events, because one of our themes is no one is left behind. Well, that means right across the county. So I know we've got wonderful centres for major events, but we can also think about other events throughout the county where it's appropriate, and you know, to spread the joy, if you like. So yes, you need a strategy. A few pointers there that I think you need to put into it, but you're going from strength to strength, and I think the snowball has started to roll, and I think it's going to get bigger and better. But you need a supportive council to make sure it happens. Thank you.
Yeah, useful comments there then, Councillor Prossett. I'm Councillor Dovey.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I applaud this paper. I think what you are doing is excellent. And of course, it's all new and you're on a fairly steep learning curve, aren't you? I mean, there are bound to be blips when it's the first time around. We've all been there and done something for the first time. So, well, I guess you learn from that. But the one point I would like to think, which might enable you to move faster and not try and reinvent the wheel, if you like, is if you speak to other people that hold these sort of events already. I mean, the people of Yorkshire who put together the start of the big cycle race, they seem to have done that, and probably there are things to learn from them. They will have made mistakes, but they'll be able to, you know, you might be able to exchange information. The other thing is, I think perhaps we are a little too anxious about seeing the results of what you're doing. These results don't come quickly. It takes more than a few minutes for the knowledge, people to have the knowledge of what's going on. It takes time to trickle through, if you like. And we don't have the money to be able to advertise as we might. So there are limitations on us being able to do that. But I think you're doing very well indeed. And the other thing I would like, in Chepstow, of course, we've got a Ned Hayward, who everybody knows. Everybody should have a Ned Hayward. Well, probably a Mark II Ned Hayward, we want a Mark I. But he has an incredible amount of knowledge of putting on festivals, etc. And I mean, we have the Chepstow Festival, which isn't just an event. It goes on for effectively 3 months, and there are things in that are quite unique, and it's very varied. And there is perhaps the opportunity for you to pick out of that things that are congruent with what you wanted to do in the council. So I'd urge you to work together with that. But I think the job you're doing is great. I'd like to see, in a way, the different areas of the county almost branded for what they have to offer. And I think Abergavenny has its food, and Monmouth is doing much the same thing now. We wouldn't dream of moving into that area. I don't think it's Chepstow, but we have ideas of how Chepstow can develop, if you like, a brand for people that are interested. And it's all built around really what Ned has done already, which is music and all that sort of thing. So there are areas that we could make a different offer, but one that would complement what other people are doing. So it would make Monmouthshire a mosaic of opportunity, if you like, a number of reasons for people to come to Monmouthshire. But yes, very good. Thank you.
I've got a couple of comments I'd like to make, but before I do so, I'd like to go to members that aren't members of this committee, but just checking first, are there any members that would like to speak further or add a comment? If not, I'll go to Councillor Webb then. I can come back afterwards.
Thank you very much. Firstly, can I thank you for your kind welcome. Thank you very much indeed. Just a couple of points. There's so many calls, aren't there, on people's leisure time at the moment, and the more we can bring them into Monmouthshire, bring it on. I'm really lucky in the ward that I live. I live in a ward where we have Tintern Station, we have the Abbey, we have Chepstow Racecourse, and many other really good event places. One or two things that just concern me. I just really wonder how you're really going to keep in touch with the locals. I mean, are you going to get copies of the village news and magazines, etc., etc.? That's a really good source of information. Or have you got local contacts? You probably already have, but I just was wondering that. And also, we always find when we put on things like the Fete in Tintern, we've got a problem with insurance, which is quite costly for small event people. And I'm just wondering if you can help out in that way at some stage. And just a plug, on the 4th of July, we've got Tintern Fete. We're going to have an American theme on the 4th of July. Just bear that in mind. Thank you very much.
The point on how we keep in touch with locals and communities, I think, is really, and I think, as Councillor Dovey touched on, is having people, the Ned Hayward type of person, who are these just immense community animators, and they seem to know absolutely everybody. And I think they are our almost the people who our networks should create. So if we're talking about an events team or whatever events look like for Monmouthshire, that should never stay with the amount of people who are necessarily employed by Monmouthshire. I think actually our events team are probably about 500 people strong. It's the Ned Haywards or the people from Abergavenny or the Abergavenny Food Festival or Jeremy Horton from Devorden, or so all of these people who just naturally bring people together. It's costly, obviously, for us to communicate all the information that we're required to. It's just immense. But I think as a model and as an example, it costs us £400 to market the firework display in Caldecott Castle. That's for 7,000 people. And by doing that, it's about having those right people on board that are the animators, that do have the energy and the contacts to do so. So I think our focus over the next couple of months is absolutely trying to identify those people who can help us in this situation. So your point about the race course and the Tinton Abbey, and people like Soundbase, I know, did the concert in Tinton not so long ago, and how we can work proactively with them so that it's that two-way process. The insurance example that I said, like this, without looking at the details, we've done different stuff in other areas, but I'm sure there's going to be a solution which we can find, and how we can enable our policies and our procedures to assist something like Tinton. So I'd be glad to have that conversation.
Thank you, Councillor Webb. I'll try and decipher the score that I've got here in front of me, because I've got just a few things, if you don't mind, if I can just add in terms of comment. The key thing for me in terms of your strategy, from my perspective, is that I think there should be an extensive mapping exercise. So you refer to a number of events that are in existence at the moment, the events that you currently put on, but we need to have that mapped out to see where the opportunities are, what the return of investment is on those events, and what potential partnership opportunities we could set up. So if they're external events, whether it's either be funding or resource or capacity, how we can actually support those. I also think we need to map out our current strategies which could be impacted by this strategy. So you mentioned destinations management strategy, and any other sort of strategies. We've got the Monmouthshire enterprise and business strategy, all these things. Does this strategy underpin the events element of those? And I think that's important to make sure that's linked in. So we need to understand what's connected. Councillor Webb and Councillor Dovey both mentioned and touched on sort of expertise in terms of our events planning. Could we have a steering group that's established to oversee this strategy and run it, made up of external members? So it could be members of the community council and, I don't know, business, anything that links into our events offer in Monmouthshire. So whether we could do that. And the one other thing I wanted to mention was the cross-border opportunities, or linking into large-scale events or assets across other counties. So, for example, the conference centres coming to the Celtic Manor, how do we link in with the Celtic Manor to make sure that we could offer events? And I think, we need to look at our own assets in terms of how we can market things like leisure centres as potential future conference centres, that sort of thing. And the last thing, sorry, I'm a long list of things, is could we potentially see some case studies develop, possibly when your new comms and engagement manager comes in, some case studies which really showcase the fantastic examples you've got of events at the moment, because just to have them at our fingertips and say this is an example of what Monmouthshire does so well would be really helpful, and obviously complement the strategy as you go forward. So those are my many comments. Sorry, Councillor Greenland.
Yeah, if I could, having listened to that debate, that was really helpful. Very positive comments from members, and I think we need to take those on board and learn from them. A couple of weeks ago, I attended an engagement training session, and one thing I picked up from there was that people don't actually take in information until they've heard it 3 times. And I suspect, actually, that may be one of the problems. And when we talk about linking into events, I think actually what we need to do better is to link in with members here, because clearly the message isn't always getting through. We need to ensure that our members here are the links. Councillor Webb mentioned about the things that need to go on in her ward. Well, actually, when we're organising an event, if she can tell us where we need to put that advertising, where we need so that we'll get most people involved, then that is a really useful thing. So I think we need to make sure that all members are getting the information, not just once, but until we're sure that they've actually got it and received it. And we need to, in particular, to be talking to those members where events are running through their wards, and I think that's a message picked up. I would actually say that, of course, we're not organising ourselves all of these events, we're enabling some of these, and that was the case with the Tour of Britain, of course. The organisation of that event was a huge thing, which was up to them, so we took a minor part in that. No doubt, and you're quite right, a calendar of events across the council, across the county, is absolutely essential. But It's enormous. The number of events that are taking place is absolutely huge. And again, if we are to get this right, members will help us. So if you have got events that are taking place in your ward, get in touch with the events team so that we are aware of it, because otherwise we pick it up through hearsay or possibly the odd occasional talk with somebody, a third party. So that would be a great help if members could do that as well. Councillor Hayward made reference to the Ryder Cup and it not having had a legacy. And again, I come back to this thing about 3 times in a row. We've had the Ryder Cup, now we've had the NATO conference. Perhaps we're getting through now that Monmouthshire, and I actually think that Celtic Manor should be in Monmouthshire, is a much better fit, but I'll leave that to next week's debate. I think that the message is getting through that Monmouthshire is getting to be on the map, but we need to be doing whatever we can to get that through much better. And so I also just want to thank the team here, because as you can quite clearly see, we've got a young and enthusiastic team that are taking this on. And, well, I'm looking at one of you in particular, I suppose. But the other one's not so old either. And I do thank you for what you're doing. And it's clear, isn't it, from the enthusiasm that members here have got, that they're on your side. This is something we want to do. It can contribute to Monmouthshire. So let's all work together, learn the lessons that we've heard this morning, and move on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll just very briefly sum up. So I think the messages that have come out are quite clear. We're obviously all very supportive of this strategy that's going to come forward. Keep us informed, consult with communities, link into other strategies in areas such as the importance of tourism, and make sure we monitor those events that do happen and look at the return on investment. Let's try and find ways to generate funds to cover your costs, because we want to see you here in the long term. Potential for us to spread events across the county. I think that's a really important point. Let's not necessarily look at the typical areas we put our events on. Let's make sure all of our county benefits. Speak to others who have expertise in events, and just keep in touch with locals, utilise our local contacts. Is there any way we can ensure that this, well, can we ensure that this comes back to this committee when the strategy is ready for pre-decision scrutiny before it goes to Cabinet? So we want to see this before it's on that Cabinet agenda.
Yes, it is on the Cabinet agenda. Probably have to delay that now to bring it back to here, which is great. It's great that we've had this session, and I'm comfortable with that. So we just need to make the necessary arrangements. Can I also mention the destination revisit?
I was going to mention it. So yeah, okay. But yeah, please do. We were going to say, could we make sure that comes to us as well before Cabinet, because we are really keen to be involved in that, and it's something this committee is very much wanting to be involved in.
Yeah. So a similar session to today for the destination. Is that appropriate? Yeah. Okay, no problem.
Great. Well, thank you very much. That was really helpful, and great to see the enthusiasm that we've got for events going forward. So thank you very much. Yeah, if members want to have a quick comfort break, because we've got to bring in Peter Davis for the next item. So we'll be 2 minutes. Thanks, members. We'll resume now, if that's okay. We've just got one substantive item left on the agenda, and that's to look at the Vale of Usk local development strategy. And we've got Peter and Kath here to present on this. I think, we had a bit of a pre-discussion about this item, so if it would be very helpful to explain, because we're unsure about the value we can add as a committee, given that it's already gone to Cabinet. But if you can perhaps explain that we can still do that, that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's I think probably helpful to drop the draft strategy into a wider context, really. So the draft strategy has been lodged with Welsh Government and was lodged with Welsh Government just prior to the 30th of September, which was a requirement that the authority had to meet. Yes, it did go to Cabinet yesterday, and that was necessary for Cabinet to endorse that strategy that is now lodged with Welsh Government. The key word in all of this is the word draft, and ultimately why. And I appreciate this is going to select off the back of Cabinet, but it is really at this stage of the process looking to seek views in from the Select Committee that then can contribute to the strategy shaping itself. Over the next couple of months, we're naturally expecting a lot of feedback from Welsh Government, as we generally do. In the next couple of months, and we will be looking then to bring a final strategy back through Cabinet in the new year. Now, when we look to do that, we will be looking, of course, to do pre-scrutiny on that final strategy.
Okay, on that benefit, on that point then, I think we're happy to go forward then, and if there's still opportunities for us to add value to the document and add our comments, given it's still a draft, the one thing then we'd say is that can we make sure this comes back to us definitely before it goes to Cabinet when it's the final strategy, so early next year. So that'd be great. Brilliant. Okay, if you could briefly introduce then the strategy document that we've had presented, and then we'll open up for questions.
Well, I'm going to very shortly hand over to Kath, and there's a very good reason for that. Because Kath has lived and breathed this, not just for a good number of years, having successfully brought forward and taken through the last round of the Rural Development Programme, but Kath has been working some extensive hours in the last few weeks and months, bringing together what you have in front of you today. So I hope for those members who have had the time to sort of digest and get a flavour of the document, I hope that you can see that it's a very comprehensive piece of work. I'm hoping that Welsh Government will see that as well, and it puts us in good stead really to move forward into the next programme, the next 5 to 6 year programme. Of course, this is a hugely important programme. This is one of our flagship European funded scheme. It brings huge value and benefit to our rural communities, has done in the programme that is now coming to an end, and surely will in the one that goes forward. So I'm just going to hand across to Kath now. Hopefully you'll find that this presentation particularly helpful, because it brings together all the succinct and salient points of the draft strategy sort of into one composite piece. And undoubtedly, I'm sure you will have questions, but hopefully this will give you some sort of core understanding. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everybody. First of all, I do apologise for the complexity of the document. We had to fit it within a framework from Welsh Government. As we all know, they have their own way of doing things. So there's probably a lot of information in there. You wonder why you've got it, but we literally had to follow a format. So that's where we are. So in terms of the Vale of Usk local development strategy, the context, as Pete's just said, is that the Rural Development Programme, or the RDP, is the main source of European funding for Monmouthshire. The way that it's set out, it goes on the rural wards that are based within the authority, of which we have numerous. The only town that is fully eligible is Monmouth. We can work in other towns, but we would have to argue that the benefit is going to the rural communities because it's a rural programme. So it doesn't stop us working, for example, in Abergavenny, so long as the benefit goes to the rural communities. And there is a complex methodology that goes with that, but it's all been sorted out. The funding itself is actually governed by an independent local action group, which is very different again for a European funded programme, because LEADER is very much about community development at a grassroots and what they term as a bottom-up level. And the local action group is basically members of the local community who come forward to represent their community and their views in terms of the funding and how it's used. And I know several members of you here today have actually been part of that over the years, and we thank you very much for being involved there. Probably more of you are aware of the Aventa Local Action Group, which is the predecessor to the Vale of Usk. The reason the name has been changed is really that we were asked by Welsh Government to work together with other authorities. We were directly approached by Newport, who actually hadn't ever had Rural Development Programme funding before. There are only a small number of wards, as the document will show you, but they felt they wanted to come with us because we had the experience through the Aventa programme that we could actually help them through that process over the next 7 years or so. As I've explained, Welsh Government required the local action group to produce this strategy, which details the activities that will take place over the funding period. So the purpose itself of the document is really, in our case, we looked at where the synergy was between the two areas so that we can actually guide our actions and make sure we get the best results all round, really. We want to build on the historical investment in Aventa and other Axis 3 projects that we've had this time round, but also review emerging programmes, because it's very much looked at how we pilot activities in innovation through the local action group, but then how we mainstream that activity and let it go forward. So it's important for us to have the strategic context within which the programme works. We've looked at various project ideas and proposals, and also the spatial and sectoral linkages that we've just talked about, again, so we ensure these maximum benefits are achieved. In terms of the development process, it was quite, we had such a very short time frame, and we were asked to consult with the local community, but we had to do that over the summer period, which is never easy when everybody's on holiday. However, we did that through various activities in terms of community consultations throughout the county and in Newport, attendance at Monmouthshire and Usk show, which actually were the best for us, particularly in Usk, it was very strong. And also an online survey that we did where we asked people to sort of look at the opportunities and to actually sort of get their opinions in. But also the advantage of the online survey has been that we've actually now created a database of people that are interested, and we can go back to them in the future. And from that then, through the online survey, we asked people to pick one word that they felt would actually depict the Vale of Usk. And this is this diagram that you've got here, really. The bigger the words are, the more often they come up in the process. So thriving, vibrant, sustainable, which we all believe. There's some nice words in there in terms of beauty, uniqueness and togetherness as well. And for us, this was really a good way then of how we took some of these words and then we actually turned it into the vision. Again, this is a draft vision, so if people feel they want to play with it and come back with us with suggestions, we'd be very pleased to hear them. But, you know, we're really looking at how we connect these territories in a landscape which we all know is amazing, but also how we foster our communities and we build the resilience. We're very lucky in terms of the economy we have in Monmouthshire and the number of small businesses that we have that makes us a lot more resilient, but also how we really embrace our natural and cultural assets and really make them work for us, but in a way that we're not doing any damage. So it's really it's complex, but it does work. Now, in terms of Welsh Government, they gave us 5 themes to work to, and they said we could either pick one or go for all of them. Our concern was if we picked one, that meant the others we would never have access to. So we've actually been greedy and gone for all of them. And these are the various ones. In terms of adding value to local identity, that's been very much the work that Aventa has done over the last 10 years, working with local producers, and you've got things like your Made in Monmouthshire initiatives, etc. But also we've looked at working with pre-startup businesses, so pre-commercial, because as we know with European funding, we cannot favour one business over another. So it's really, you know, we've got to be careful how we do this, but also looking at shortening supply chains, particularly with the food producers. But quite pertinent to us now going forward is how we look at new ways of providing non-statutory services. So maybe an opportunity for the authority here. We've done a lot of work on renewables in the current programme, but it's how we take those forward to the next stage. And obviously with the super fast broadband rollout, how we exploit that digital technology, because it's really important that we're getting broadband, but we need to ensure our communities can use it once it's come. So that's part of what we'll be doing. It's probably pertinent to mention at the moment, there is an ICT exploitation for businesses programme going on, which will be going on at the same time as this. We have been told categorically under the RDP we can work with communities and they will be working with businesses in terms of Welsh Government and local authorities. So we're quite clear in terms of our demarcation lines there. So as part of the exercise, we asked people to prioritise the activities, because we were told that if you want to go for all 5, that's fine, but you need to weight them accordingly. So we did this, and as part of the activities that we did over the summer, we asked people to weight them, really, or to say which ones they felt were most important to them. Given all the noise about super fast and broadband, typically people said exploiting digital technology, as we would expect, and actually we would want them to do that as well. But also for us, surprisingly, came up adding value to local identity, and we felt that although for 10 years we've been doing this, we still realise that the landscape in Monmouthshire particularly just keeps giving. There's still so much more that we can do, and certainly our communities recognise that as well. The one thing I will say is that at the moment, although those are the key themes, we will be redressing those so we can adjust them as we go forward, because in our view, you can't actually set priorities at this stage and expect them to be the same in 7 years, because the world won't be the same in 7 years. So we need to create a programme that adapts as it grows, really. So the way that it's going to work is that we have a pot of money. The LAG will go out for regular calls for projects. Initially, we'll be targeting those with the high priorities to bring those forward. But also we'll be looking for a good round view, really, that we're actually covering all those themes. There will be a team out there to actually help communities develop their projects, and that'll be hosted through Monmouthshire. We'll provide the administrative body, as we have done in the past, for all the admin functions, really. And that team will be co-funded at 100% through the Rural Development Programme. So the team itself is funded. However, the projects are an 80-20 split. So the 80% comes from Welsh Government and Europe, with a 20% either to be found from private sector companies if they want to come forward, community groups if they can, but also we'll need to underwrite that as an authority, because potentially we could put through projects for the authority if we want to, but we just need to safeguard that and make sure that happens. However, just for us to think about, considering the team we had in the past, which was about 15 staff, we're now down to 5. The reason for this is they've split up the funding. In the previous time, we had a Venta plus another programme called Access 3, which allowed us to do all sorts of other things. That's actually called now the Rural Community Development Fund, and we will have to bid directly into Welsh Government for that, but that won't happen until September. However, projects will need to come through the local action group, so we'll always be aware of what's going on. But we need to be on the front toe here, because we need to ensure we get some of that, a good majority of that money from Monmouthshire. So we're well aware of this fund, and we're keeping an eye on how that's going to look. So in terms of the potential scope of the projects, as part of the online survey, we've been asking people, and also as part of the engagement activity, we've been asking people to come up with projects that potentially they feel could fit. So predominantly we've been looking at how can we connect the communities more in terms of Monmouthshire and Newport, but we need to ensure we've got mutual benefit and how we can all learn from each other. As we know, there's a lot of investment already gone in, so how can we actually learn from each other but also add value and start moving forward again? Examples of things that have come through are business networks, but also women's business networks. That's starting to gain a lot of traction in the authority, and we can look to how we can pilot some of those things. ICT, looking at community hubs, digital hubs in local areas, and also how we can use perhaps village halls as a hub really for tourism, downloadable apps for tourism that can then take out people into the rural hinterland, so we can actually spend more money locally in the smaller villages as opposed to just being in the honeypot areas. But there's a whole raft of projects that are actually contained within the intervention logic table that you have with you. But we're actually putting that into a more palatable executive summary to make it a bit easier for people to get their heads around what we're talking about, really. But needless to say, there's huge scope to do things with this money if we spend it cleverly. But we really need to engage with our communities to encourage them to bring the projects forward so we can actually work with them to do that. So as I said, in terms of the funding package, what we need is the 20% match funding to be underwritten. What I will state is in the past it's been a revenue and capital programme. It's only revenue this time. The capital fund will come through the Rural Community Development Fund that I referred to earlier. So if we've got specific projects, capital projects, we may be able to get them funded, but we'll have to go through another route. So this is really on-the-ground activity, teams out there engaging, facilitating and making projects happen. So at the moment, if we get the 5% European funding allocation, we're looking at a £2.7 million fund over the next 7 years. Welsh Government have actually approached the European Commission to see if this could be increased to 6%, but we don't know the answer to that question yet, hence the reason why all this is draft at this stage. So the amount of match funding to be underwritten would be 420,000 in terms of Monmouthshire, with the remaining 85 then being underwritten by Newport. So what we've actually done is looked at where all the wards are and then split it up accordingly. In reality, it might look slightly different as the programme goes on, depending on the projects and where the activity is, but we needed some methodology at this stage to work with. So in terms of the next steps, as we said, this is very much a draft document, but it's difficult to come to you with a strategy to comment on until you've actually seen it. So we need something to work with, and this is what we're working with at the moment. It was a crazy deadline from Welsh Government in September, but we've worked to that. But with experience, there will be numerous things that they want us to change, which is absolutely fine. But we would also expect our communities and yourselves as members to send us whatever you feel is important, and then we can adapt this strategy going forward. What's actually happening is every year we will be asked to revise this. So there's plenty of opportunities going forward in terms of what this looks like, but it's a starting point. So to maintain the relationship that we had with our online survey participants, we're going out again on Monday, basically just cross-checking with them that they're comfortable with the priorities that have been set, the vision that's being developed. And also, so that'll give them 2 weeks just to have a think about that and whether they're comfortable with that. We've also, as I say, just working on an exec summary document at the moment that will be available. Then obviously there's a process of amendments to be made. And my gut feeling is November, December, we'll need to get the final version to Welsh Government. We haven't been told yet, but we're working to that as a team. And at the moment, they're sticking with an anticipated approval date of January. So we'll just have to see whether that actually happens, or we're just working with them at the moment. For budget purposes, and also because we always get slippage, we felt the start date would be the 1st of April would be something that was more practical. From a budget point of view, and also in terms of getting a team in place. So we would look to start recruitment February, March with a view to actually start it in April. Okay, thank you.
There's only one probably further point I just wanted to add, and it goes back to what Kath just talked about in terms of the match funding implications for the authority. And it's just to say that that is being met from existing resource. So we have a budget, we have a revenue budget in place already, which is obviously covering funding the existing programme. So we will be looking to utilise that budget to cover the match funding element for the next programme. And that that has been assessed, and I've checked that through with finance, and that is all adequate and sufficient.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful presentation. Members, do you have any comments or questions relating to the presentation?
I'll have a go then.
That's possible.
Well, I've been involved with the LAG in the past. I can't remember what capacity over the years. I think it's been town councillor, consultant and county councillor, I think. But I've seen the benefit of the rural development programmes. where you've actually assisted local communities in the rural areas to develop their ideas and their aspirations. So I can see the benefit of it all. The only thing I'm concerned about at the moment is obviously it's got to be finance all round. We all know the pressures on us. Did you say that all the team are already funded by the RDP programme and that it is only the projects that need support? Is that right?
Yes, that's right. They're 100% funded. Yeah, as is the case at the moment.
Okay. Well, with that then, obviously it opens the door to a lot of finance, and we've got to be very careful of how we spend any pounds, really. And I would think if we're going to match fund with 20%, the projects we match fund really have to be focused and appropriate. Yeah. So, because I know over the years, when funding is available, there have been various levels of project, and how can I put this in a nice way? Some are very, very strategic, and others are nice to haves. Yeah. So I think in the future it would have to be very focused projects to sort of qualify for that match funding, I would suggest. But yes, it does open a lot of doors, and I wish you well.
Great.
I guess the one key point I'd like to make with that is, and I think Kath touched on it in her presentation, it really is about making this money work really, really hard. Kath touched on, I think, in her first slide, this is the core European funding that we will receive as an authority. There's not a lot of funding streams that work on an 80-20 split. So the opportunity of being able to leverage that much money for the level of match funding contribution we're putting in, it's pretty fantastic. The final point I would want to make, really, and I talked to Kath quite a lot about alignment. And Kath's mentioned there, we've got those themes, and there is one there in terms of public services, and how we look to work with communities in terms of delivering those going forward, and given obviously the challenging times that we're in at the moment. And I go back to that word alignment, and it's making sure where possible that we can get that alignment. So we're not looking to if we're having to disinvest out of things that we're doing at the minute. For good reason, as hard as it is, if we can look at using the opportunity, the RDP, to sort of supplement or complement what we might be having to forego, well, that is excellent. So I go back to that word, alignment is really important. Making the money work very hard is very important.
One of the things that is particularly interesting to me is the promotional plan for this, and it's really good that that's been included. I'm assuming that had to be in there anyway as part of your guidance from Welsh Government. But the key thing for the programme, once it is adopted, is take-up and ensuring that it's promoted adequately within local communities. And then it referring on to, I probably won't be able to find the page now, there's a detailed part about equal opportunities and trying to ensure those in isolated communities, those that are traditionally not as linked in to projects like this, have the opportunity to actually engage. How will the promotional activity be funded, and will that be undertaken purely by the 5 members of staff, or will you be engaging with our comms and engagement team to try and ensure that we have sufficient take-up and that those isolated communities have an opportunity to engage thoroughly through the process?
To be honest, it's going to be a bit of both. We do have a comms plan, but for me, it's not there yet. There's still a fair bit of work to do. A lot of the communications plan was based in terms of how you're actually going to engage through the development process. We now need to revisit that in terms of how we're actually going to promote the projects and the opportunity then for people to bid into the projects. I totally agree with you that we need to ensure that we're reaching the hard-to-reach communities. Our experience on Adventure is you only do that by getting out there and going talking to people, and that is exactly what we intend to do in this case. The budget for the promotion plan is actually included within the 100% RDP part that's funded. Part of it is staff, part of it is promotion, part of it is looking at sort of staff needs in terms of office, ICT, etc. So that's actually covered in there. We would absolutely look to work with our comms team. They're very good. Their networks are excellent. And certainly things like social media is already working well for us. So we would absolutely, intend to do that going forward. We've also found that launch events are very good and actually stimulate activity. We actually have a closure event of the current programme in November, so we would expect to sort of mention the fact that the new programme is starting, obviously, as part of that. But absolutely, you know, sort of making sure that we're getting the message out there day in, day out, really.
I'd be quite keen for us to, as members, to be able to add as well, potentially, to your consultee list that you've got here. So, for example, the 2 community councils in my ward, you know, they'd love this, you know, some of the work that you're proposing through this plan, and love the opportunity to get involved. So it'd be great if we could include those to make sure that we have a comprehensive list of consultees, you know, across all wards. Members, any other questions? Councillor Wintour?
Okay. Yeah, we've been to various meetings together on that event. It seems a pity we're going to lose a lot of expertise with the current staff you've got at the moment. I take it you're going to sort of cherry pick, or you're going to train new people, you said?
I couldn't agree more, really. I think it's quite difficult this time, because in terms of the previous programmes, they've been very similar. One has gone into another one, they've been very similar. This is quite different, purely because in the past we've had specific project officers, whether it's one on food or on tourism, as you know, so they've had specific project areas. The difference is with this programme is it's a lot more generic in terms of the skills that are going to be needed. It's very much about community engagement, also about digital exploitation. It's also about business networks. So although we have some team in place currently, which we will obviously clearly try and keep in post, we were unable to keep all of them in post, given the difference in numbers alone. And that's certainly, you know, so we'll need to recruit some. Sadly, some we're going to lose. In the past, we've been able to also to access transition funding from Welsh Government, and that just hasn't happened this time. And actually, in Monmouthshire, we've been very lucky. We've managed to keep the team in place as long as we have. It's been a lot of jiggery-pokery with budgets, to be honest, to manage to do that. I know colleagues in Powys closed down sort of early spring. You know, so we've managed to go so far, but unfortunately, we are going to lose people, and that's very sad for us.
Kelly?
Yeah, I just wanted to echo Cath's comments, really. I don't think it's a case of cherry picking, of course. It's about aligning the right skill sets to the projects and the programmes that we have as we go forward. But you did hear members about half an hour ago, Ian and Dan, talking about setting up a special events team. You know, we've got staff that have worked with Cath over the last couple of years who are real specialists in terms of staging major events. And wherever possible in the authority, where we're looking to advance new ventures, we will be looking to retain as many of those valuable staff as possible. And special major events is an area where I definitely think we can have that alignment quite quickly.
Can I just briefly ask, what's the situation with Torvine?
Not good, to be honest. All their project officers have already gone. They have a manager in place, but with the current programme going forward, that manager's only going to be employed for 3 days a week. Initially, they came to us right at the start of the process and said they wanted to join us as a local action group, but then the various different things were going on and they didn't make that decision. Part of the preface to the strategy, we talked about whether there'd be potential for them to join us. When they actually went back to Welsh Government, they said, well, you can do, but you'll lose £500,000, which is your indicative allocation for the one lag. So unfortunately now they've got a link forward with a project officer on 3 days a week. So it's quite a serious situation for them. And I think it's an absolute shame, because they're going to lose a lot of the ground they've already, you know, sort of moved forward on, really. They have approached us about whether we provide administrative functions for them going forward. We don't know the detail of that yet, and obviously that would clearly need to be resourced, and we need to ensure that we can do that. So there are ongoing conversations. We've tried, you know, we've done our best to work with them, but various things have worked against us on that. Yeah.
Members of the committee, or members who are here who aren't members of the committee, are there any questions that you have further on the strategy and the approach? Bearing in mind that we'll have it come back to us again, which is going to actually probably be the next committee meeting, I would have thought, given the timescales that you need to submit this final version to Welsh Government November, December.
I was thinking so, to be honest, Sarah. They haven't told us yet. We were given a submission date, but as yet I've had nothing other than thank you very much, we've got it. That's all I've had. So I don't know what dates we're working to next. And unfortunately, that seems to be the way it's going for a lot of things, really. We don't know. I'll let you know, absolutely.
Yeah, Hazel just made a very good point. After Christmas was certainly better for us because we've got quite a full agenda, but clearly if we need it to come forward, we need it to come forward. Sorry, Councillor White.
We were told you spent a lot of time on this, and by golly, we can see it. But it's readable, and thank you for that. You know, it's some papers I just get lost, but this is understandable, and that's what we need. And thank you.
I completely agree with Councillor White. I think, you know, although it's a massive document, it's had to be because it's had to go to Welsh Government, it's so helpful because it links into national strategy and it gives a really good mapping of what the current situation is, bringing them together, all your knowledge and engagement, which is a really useful engagement process you've obviously been through, so really helpful. I'll just hand over to Councillor Greenland. Did you have a couple of comments to make and then we'll
really just to thank Kath Fallon and Peter Davis for this work. I said to Cabinet yesterday, this is a really good read. It may not be Booker, but it's top of Monmouthshire County Council's reading list. Very readable, very informative. A lot of work's gone into that. We are at an exciting time because, as Kath has said, this is the opportunity for getting European money into Monmouthshire. We must grasp that and we must use it in the best way possible. And they are setting up the process to make sure that we make best use of that. And I'm looking forward to the schemes coming forward again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much both. We look forward to the final version coming forward to us before Cabinet. Okay, let's move on to the work programme and just check through what we've got coming up now before the end of the year. Hazel, do you mind if I pass over to you just to run through what we've got coming up?
Chair, our next meeting is the 20th of November. We did request that we would like to discuss the future of cultural services, but that is a paper that's already gone through Cabinet. So given our discussion in pre-meeting this morning, I'm not sure what you feel about doing, looking at that item, because there's nothing really that you can add. It might be better that we just circulate that report via email for members to read. We do have improvement objectives and outcome agreements, which are statutory items that we must consider, performance items, but I think today we've earmarked that we would like the tourism paper to come back to us, and I'll need to check with officers whether it's possible to bring it back to that meeting. But I think given that it was programmed in the Cabinet Planner for this next month, I think it should be okay to bring that to you on the 20th. I would suggest that's as full a meeting as you should have, because you're going to want to go into depth on that. And then the final issue that I need to raise with you is that every year you undertake scrutiny of the risk assessment, the key risks that relate to your portfolio. Those are namely SRS, CMC squared. They're issues that you've kind of built into your work programme anyway, but it's your opportunity to look at the risk assessment, call in the Cabinet member and make sure that you're satisfied that the risks are being mitigated and the right actions are being taken, and that those risks are categorised correctly, whether you think they should be high, low, medium, and you've done this very successfully in the past and you've actually altered the risk register. So that's one thing that you do need to do before Christmas. And also you need to consider budget mandates that relate to your committee. Now, from last year's experience, there were a lot of budget mandates, and I don't believe there's going to be as many this year, but I would suggest you perhaps do the risk assessment and the budget mandates in one meeting, and for that you're going to need a special meeting in December because your last meeting this year is the 20th of November. So how do members feel about a special meeting of this committee in December to do those items?
We've also got event strategy coming back, haven't we? Which I don't know whether Dan didn't give an indication of time on that. And obviously what we've just heard now, that potentially, hopefully it'll be early next year, but that could potentially be December as well. So members, are you happy to have a special meeting in December to cover these? I think personally, I think we have to.
You could do it Wednesday morning, or you could do it Thursday morning. There's a domestic abuse meeting, but I'm not sure if any of you are involved in that.
Unless it's one I might be chairing. I chair one of the steering groups.
The steering group, yeah.
I don't. There's a 3 steering groups. That's not the one that I.
Okay.
Yes, that's fine.
Wednesday the 3rd, did you mention?
Yeah. The 3rd or the 4th?
Oh, the 4th. Personally, 4th.
In the morning.
The 4th.
I got citizenship in the morning.
Of the 4th?
Yeah.
The 3rd then?
3rd's okay. 3rd's okay.
Joe, can you do the 3rd? Moving things around. Kev, can you do the 3rd? Right. Sorry, Doug, is that all right if we put it on? Or is it going to be here?
As long as we got Phil.
Yes, please.
Are we going to have a pre-meeting at 9:30?
Yeah, if we do 9:30 pre-meet. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
And then the Cabinet Forward Work Planner, well, we pretty much covered that. The only one thing was CMC Squared, which it's coming to as a Cabinet paper forward in November. It's been deferred, is it? Okay. So I don't think there's anything else, unless anyone's got anything to raise on the Forward Planner. We'll check that.
I don't think you'll be looking at that before the new year.
Because you get 28 days to consult on whether the blue badge would be
Statement extraordinary about this, doesn't it? A year and a half, round about, nearly 2 years.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. Next meeting then on the 20th of November. Thanks.